Why is the church homophobic?
Well, I think the question there already is kind of loaded with the assumption that it is, or at least I would say definitely the perception is we are that way. You look at the media, sadly you look at some churches who have picketed things and put signs up and stuff like that, and that gives the impression that we are homophobic. And I think if anybody's ever addresses that question with you or comes to you, I think it's always good to apologize, right? It's always good to own up, because as Christians, we're not the hero of the story. We know that. Jesus is the hero of the story. We're the ones who need the hero to come in and rescue us. And even when we're rescued, we don't always act right. And so we do act wrong sometimes. We do act hypocritical sometimes. We do act homophobic sometimes. And so I think if we are, and I think we have been, if I'm speaking of the church as a whole, all of Christianity, I think we do act that way sometimes, and we shouldn't be. That's definitely true. This, book should not lead us to be that way. We should not be homophobic. We shouldn't fear others, and we should fear God. We should focus on Him and revering Him, and not fearing other people or making people feel like we don't like them. Now, with that, I think we also need to answer the question, because I think in culture now, in our American culture, we've redefined a very key term when it comes to conflict, and that's the term of tolerance. Tolerance used to mean that it's okay, or you grant somebody the right to be wrong. And so if we disagree on something, I grant you the right to be wrong, you grant me the right to be wrong, and we're going to have opposing views, but we're granting each other the right to be wrong, and so we can still be friendly, nice, and cordial, right? Well, that's not what tolerance means now. Tolerance means nobody's wrong. You're 100% right, I'm 100% right, and we go about our ways. Well, that's just wildly inconsistent. If you have two varying viewpoints and they're saying one thing is true here, one thing is true here on an objective thing, if we're not arguing about what kind of ice cream you like, but if we're arguing about is 2 + 2 4, there's not multiple answers to that. Either you're right or you're wrong. And teachers grant students to be wrong all the time. It's part of their learning process, right? But they're still wrong. And I think what's happened now is we've not allowed anybody to say, that's wrong. That is objectively wrong. My position is that is wrong. And what happens is the culture has turned and said, no, those people, now they become intolerant of us. And so to say that people are wrong is a view that's not tolerated. So they become intolerant of what they think is our lack of tolerance, but really is tolerance. And so it's all jumbled up. A way to think of this is like my grandma is a huge UCLA fan, right? She'll call me when UCLA beats USC because I'm a big USC fan. Now, I love my grandma, and my grandma loves me, and I've granted my grandma the right to be wrong. UCLA is not a team she should root for, right? USC is the team she should root for. And my grandma grants me the right to be wrong. She thinks UCLA, wrongly, is the team to root for, and USC is the wrong one. Now, tolerance looks like this. When I go to my grandma's living room and we hang out, I'm not going to cheer for her team. She's not going to cheer for my team, but we can still eat together, right? We may not cheer for the opposing team, but we can eat together. I still have Thanksgiving and meals with her, but my grandma's not expecting me to change jerseys, to take my hat off. Now, if I'm ever watching a game with my grandma, which is not too often, I have wisdom, right? When I walk into her living room, I'm not arrogant, boastful, pushy, and saying all these comments when UCLA falls apart like it inevitably does all the time. I don't do that, right? I want to have fan wisdom, if you will, to say, hey, I'm going to cheer for my team, but I'll still eat with you. See, I think what we have to realize as Christians is we can do this with the world. Like we are in a different living room right now. We are in the world, as Jesus says, but we are not of the world. So we may be cheering for different teams, but we can still eat with the people we disagree with, right? And Jesus, in his prayer for his disciples, he's telling them he's about to go, and Jesus kind of gives us this dynamic in John chapter 17. This is what he says, and if you listen to it, you can hear the idea that we're in a different living room, we're in a different spot. We are in the world, but yet there's something different. We're not of the world. Jesus says this, he says in John 17 when he's praying for his followers in verse 14, he says, I have given them your word. He's saying, God, I've given them your instructions, right? And the world has hated them because they are not of this world, just as I am not of this world. I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in truth. Your word is truth. What Jesus is saying is, what makes them not of the world is I've given them your word, your instruction, and this instruction keeps them from Satan. It keeps them from the evil one. It keeps them from temptation. It keeps them on the right side of sin. They follow different rules. But Jesus says, I don't want to take these people out. Like, because I'm a USC fan, does that mean I never go into a living room where there's UCLA fans? Right? No, it just means I don't change my jersey. Right? I don't change who I cheer for. I can still eat with those people. And this is what Jesus kind of says, the very same thing. Verse 18, he says, as you sent me into the world, so I sent them into the world. So for their sake, I consecrate myself that they may also be sanctified in truth. Jesus says, I was intentionally sent into this living room that's different than what I'm used to, right? And Jesus is saying, I'm sending you guys too. All of us are sent into a living room where people are cheering for a different team, right? And Daniel finds himself kind of in a similar situation. And you think, again, Daniel, in a very tough time, Daniel finds himself being so wise and so humble. Like, Daniel knows when he'll compromise. Daniel knows when a choice goes too far. Like, Daniel wants to work for the king. Daniel wants to help the nation. Daniel wants to do those things. But he knows there's a fine line to eating with the king and cheering for the king's team. There's a fine line of working for Babylon and bowing to Babylon. And so what happens is Daniel's kind of later on in his life, there's a decree that comes out that says, you can't pray to any other god. You got to pray like the king tells you to pray. And it says that Daniel hears this. And in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, this is probably the biggest story of Daniel. This is Daniel in the lion's den. Well, how did he get there? He got there because in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, it says this. When Daniel knew the document had been signed, this law that you can't pray to God like Daniel wanted to, it said Daniel went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God. Right there, what did Daniel say? He's been working for the king. He's been helping the king out. Babylon is thriving because Daniel is there. But Daniel says, this rule, I can't follow. Right? This one I can't do. And he knows what's going to happen. He knows the punishment that's going to happen because he will not cheer for another team. He will not change his fanship. He will not compromise in that way, right? He has wisdom to know where to draw the line, and this is where he draws the line. Now, what's remarkable is Daniel is thrown into this lion's den. The king regrets it, realizing that this is what happened to Daniel, and then he runs to the lion's den. And just look at how Daniel responds. You think Daniel would not like this guy. I mean, he's older in his life. He's thrown into this place, which I'm sure he probably didn't fall delightfully to the ground, right? He probably hurt himself. And now he's in a den of lions, and they look hungry, right? And they want Daniel. They want to eat him. And God saves him and rescues him. And so what happens is the king runs up, and this is what it says in Daniel chapter 6, verse 19. And says, and then at daybreak the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And as he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? Now this is Daniel's response. You think Daniel would say, yes, you foolish king, look, I'm untouched. But that's not what he says. Like, you threw me in here. You know what? I'm going to grab you and throw you in. But that's, again, not what Daniel does. This is what Daniel says. It says, then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. The king who just tried to kill him, he says, I want you to live forever. And then he says, God has delivered me from this. So what this shows us, again, is Daniel's a man of incredible wisdom. He knows how the things he can do, when he can eat with the king, when can he go to their school, when can he allow his name to be changed, when can he work to help the nation be better. But he knows when to say, I cannot cheer for another team. And I think for us, we need to have wisdom to realize we can disagree, we should disagree. We shouldn't make every little small issue our banner issue. That's not what Daniel did. right? The king did things, I'm sure, that Daniel didn't like. The king, the whole nation did things that Daniel didn't like. But when it came to Daniel and his obedience, he said, this is where I draw the line. So he had wisdom to make you got to know which hill you want to die on, right? You don't make every issue the big issue. And we see this all the time in social media for Christians. Every issue is the biggest issue. Let's boycott Disney. Let's boycott Target. Let's boycott everything, right? And we make every issue the biggest issue it's ever been. That is not Daniel's mentality. Daniel knows where to draw the line. So I think we can learn a lot from Daniel in being wise to say, here's the line. I know when I've crossed it, right? And not push the line so over here that, man, nobody ever wants us to come over to the house because they know we're that annoying USC fan who's always going to put down the other team. You gotta have wisdom in that. I think if we had more wisdom in how we talk, how we use social media, I think that impression that the world gets that we're homophobic would go away, or at least it would lose some of its ground.
Yeah, I think it's important that when we ask about the church and the church's stance, and the church always wants to be a place that is approachable. Mm-hmm. And so when we are not wise in where we draw the line in our conviction, we can have conviction, but when we choose poorly, or we say everything we take a hard line on, mm-hmm. then I think we as Christians in the church in general, we become unapproachable. And right. That is exactly what the devil would want, but I do not think that's what the Lord would want us to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to know where to draw the line. Got to be wise. Don't cause a fight that really doesn't need to be a fight. You know, and that's how we'll stand on the right things, and we can not stand on wrong things, and that just becomes distractions for people. And I think that has happened so much in social media. So if we had a generation of wise, godly followers, I think we can reverse some of those trends. Even as far as the culture gets. I mean, Babylon was much farther than America is. And yet Daniel was able to thrive there and be wise there. And the king loved him still, even though he tried to kill him. So we could have that kind of relationship with people. People could still find us favorable, even though we are in disagreement with them.